Well, hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on how we can nourish the nervous system. I'm Rosemary Nichols, and I'm a health educator for Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare and Tufts Health Plan. And that's our topic today. You know, when you think about it, your nervous system guides almost everything that you think or you say or you feel, your movements, your thoughts, your memory. It's also about the things that happen automatically in the body, such as blushing or blinking. With such an important role, why wouldn't we want to keep it healthy? So today we're going to talk about the nervous system and how we can keep it healthy. And since the title suggests nourishment, we're going to start with the dietary factors, but include a number of other things as well. So let me put on our PowerPoint. Should be able to see that now. All right, so let's start with a brief discussion of the nervous system, very brief. You know, each part, we have a central nervous system, which includes the brain and the spinal column, and then the peripheral nervous system that includes all of those, you know, those nerve fibers, those nerves that are going to the brain, to the head, to the neck, to the extremities. And each part contains billions of cells, and we call these cells neurons. And they're active, they're sending and receiving both electrical and chemical messages. And so here we see two neurons, and the body or soma of the neuron is that little round thing that has the branching out around it that sort of looks like an M&M. And those branches around it, we call those dendrites, and they receive messages which travel along and eventually get dumped into this synapse. And the interesting thing is the signal is electrical until it reaches that space in between the two neurons. And then the signal is chemical. You hear about neurotransmitters, and those are what gets released into that synaptic gap. So let's start with diet and how that's important to these neurotransmitters. So what about a plant-based diet, fruits and vegetables and whole grains, not refined, together with healthy fats? In other words, you know, avoiding too much in the way of saturated fat and focusing on the mono and the polyunsaturated fats like we get from many of our plant foods, with the exception of coconut oil, palm and palm kernel oil. Those are really saturated fats. So we're looking at those kind of fats as being considered as healthy fats. And quality proteins, we'll talk about those in a minute. And what we want to avoid, as I mentioned a minute ago, is a high dietary intake of saturated fat. The chemical structure is different. We're not going to go into that. Tends to be more solid at room temperature, but most saturated fats, other than coconut, palm oil, etc., come from animal products. And that's why typically, you know, we say go for the less fatty choices of meat. If you're going to do meat, cut the fat off. If it's a piece of steak, limit your red meat is a good idea. More fish and chicken for other reasons. Highly processed foods, in addition, you want to avoid those. You know, when they don't look like the natural food item that they originate from, the more they gravitate away from there, the more they're processed. And refined carbohydrates, the white bread, the white flour, you know, the cookies, the sugar, etc. All right, we mentioned neurotransmitters, these chemical messengers, right? And here we see a little image with them actually entering that little synaptic gap, that synapse. And they are synthesized, or at least some of them, such as norepinephrine, from an amino acid called tyrosine. Amino acids are just the building block of protein. So this suggests that we're going to eat protein-based foods, right? Along with some vitamin C, some of your B vitamins, iron, and copper. These are necessary for norepinephrine. Why do we care about that particular neurotransmitter? It regulates the sleep-wake cycle. It's important for alertness. It really affects the stress response too, which is important for survival. And it helps to control a healthy blood pressure. Tyrosine is also important for dopamine, which gives us that sense of pleasure and motivation. You can raise your dopamine levels with exercise too. And certainly you can, dopamine gets released when you smoke. We're not advocating that, but we want to start with a good, healthy diet. So look at your sources: healthy foods, whole foods, soybeans, fish, chicken, beef, nuts, eggs, dairy, beans, and whole grains. Okay. The amino acid tryptophan, you think of turkey when you think of tryptophan, at least I do, along with a number of B vitamins and vitamin D, the sunshine vitamin, which we can get in a limited amount of foods like fatty fish and eggs, are necessary for serotonin. Maybe you've heard of serotonin. That's a neurotransmitter that influences mood and memory, and is important for a healthy GI balance, a gastrointestinal balance, the gut. In fact, a lot of the serotonin is created or synthesized in the gut. Sources include poultry, kidney beans, peanuts, oatmeal, brown rice. You notice we're going to see some of the same foods over and over as we look at these few slides. We mentioned a number of vitamins, for example, that are important, that play a role along with the amino acids. And B vitamins, a number of the B vitamins are so important for the nervous system and for its functioning. B1, for example, is involved in nerve transmission. And B6 is very important for the synthesis of some of the neurotransmitters, dopamine, serotonin. And the myelin sheath, that's a coating on the axon, on the nerve. It almost acts like the coating you'd have around an electrical wire, say on an extension cord, or on the old phones that we used to use. And that's very protective, and it keeps the messages moving along very quickly. B12, our primary source of B12 is from animal products. And so people who are vegans, for example, need to rely on other sources. And you can get usually many of these B vitamins in many of your cereals. You'll see they may have all the B vitamins added. So required for the synthesis of the myelin sheath, again, and the effectiveness of what we call folate, or vitamin B9. And B9 is also necessary for myelin components and neurotransmitters. So look at all the important roles that these B vitamins play in your nervous system. Some of the same sources of food. A lot of your B vitamins come with your protein foods: seafood and poultry, dairy, legumes we see here. In other words, all of your beans, your pulses, leafy greens. I mentioned fortified breakfast cereals and some fortified foods, and nutritional yeast. Some of the vegans may rely on that. Omega-3 fatty acids. You may hear about these in connection with foods or seeds such as flax seeds or chia seeds. and or walnuts, edamame, and broccoli. There's evidence that the omega-3s may contribute to enhanced cognitive functioning. We know omega-3s play very important roles in cardiovascular health. And the mantra that I like to give my students when I teach in the classroom is whatever is good for the heart is good for the brain. So these are heart healthy foods and they're brain healthy foods. There's evidence for anti-inflammatory, what we call antioxidant effects. They protect the cells. And there's a lot of, research today that suggests inflammation in the body is bad. So, if you got an injury in the area, you develop some inflammation, that would be good for healing. But chronic, low-lying inflammation appears to increase the risk for a number of chronic diseases, including even Alzheimer's. They're looking at that. So there's evidence that it may have benefit for healthier brains, these omega-3s. We know that some of these omegas, we call them marine omegas, the ones we see at the top, your fatty fish, the tuna, the salmon, the anchovies, bluefish, if you like that, and a number of others, may be important for the development of the nervous system in early life. So babies would get this in breast milk and many of the formulas that they would be consuming. So you want to be sure, in addition to maybe having walnuts and broccoli and some of those other foods that contribute to the omega-3s in our diet, that you have at least 2 fish meals a week for what we call the marine omegas, the DHA and the EPA, which are in particular importance for the heart and the brain. Some of these other, omegas that we get were actually called alpha-linolenic acid, get converted, but the conversion rate is relatively slow. And so the best way to supplement it is to have a couple of fish meals a week. You ever think of calcium in your brain? We usually think of it as important for our bones. Well, we know that it helps to release neurotransmitters and may be important for our memory formation as well. And calcium and potassium that we get from a lot, in particular of particular fruits and vegetables. Many people think of bananas, but in many other fruits and vegetables as well, help to regulate the electrical nerve impulses. Another mineral, magnesium, again, important for bone health, is believed to play a role in mood disorders. These minerals can be found in many of your plant foods, in beans, in nuts, in meat, and in milk. We're talking about the consumption of whole foods here. What about water? You think about any connection between water and your nervous system? Probably not. We know it helps to prevent dehydration, and we know it can cause confusion and memory problems. Adult women probably should be consuming 9 cups of water a day, and men 19 plus 13 cups of water or the equivalent thereof. Are we going to get water from, in coffee and tea as well? And in some of the foods that we eat, particularly things like watermelon and, some of our fruits and vegetables are going to give us more in the way it's going to have a higher water content. They contribute to the water that's so important for our overall health in general. Some studies even show that mild dehydration can have a negative impact on your mood and your emotional well-being. So you want to make sure you get enough water. Remember, it's also important for bowel function, right? And so if you get concerned about constipation, eating, for example, that fiber in the diet that you're going to get from fruits and vegetables and whole grains and drinking enough water can help you stay regular. Foods that trigger the stress response. Now, remember, the stress response is an evolutionary survival mechanism. It helped us to decide we're going to run away and from that saber-toothed tiger or fight it off. And it helped us with our survival. But chronic stress in today's world, when we don't have to worry about our physical well-being, the stress at work, the financial stresses, etc., can be problematic. And we know some foods can contribute to that stress response. So those refined carbohydrates, too much caffeine, refined sugar. Caffeine, by the way, provides us with antioxidants, and upwards to 400 milligrams, or roughly upwards to 4 cups of coffee a day, that provides us with caffeine or caffeinated drinks. Seems to be fine. Just be careful the time that you consume those caffeinated drinks, not too close to bedtime. It's got a half-life of about 6 hours. So if you consume coffee with caffeine at 6 o'clock, half of the caffeine is left in your system around midnight, and that's going to affect your quality of your sleep. So you want to be careful. But too much caffeine can be a problem. And, when we're chronically stressed, it ultimately can lead to anxiety and depression, according to the literature. We think about exercise and physical fitness, don't we? But how about your nervous system? Well, the brain requires a good circulation because of its high metabolic demand. And we know exercise aids the blood flow. And so regular exercise may be good for, your body weight, may help to keep you physically fit, but it will also enhance the nervous system. It promotes growth factors, in fact, that enhance those synaptic connections between the neurons. And these are essential for long-term memory and for learning. So don't negate the exercise. Find time. Can you find 30 minutes, about 5 times a week, to do some aerobic activity and maybe even a little strength training a couple of days a week? And if you don't go to the gym, maybe with some stretchy bands, or some light weights that you can pick up at the sports store, or even some of the drugstores today carry light weights, 2 pounds, 5 pounds, etc. And you can find lots of resources on the internet to help you with some basic exercises. Important for your nervous system. We know that exercise helps to prevent a number of chronic diseases, and many of these actually impact the brain. We know, for example, that elevated blood pressure, elevated cholesterol can affect the aging of the brain. It can lead to dementias. We know that if you have type 2 diabetes, or any diabetes actually, but thinking about type 2 or type 1 that's not well controlled, again, it can have an effect on the brain, on memory. It can affect the size of that hippocampus. We call it the switch station between short and long-term memory, important for memory consolidation. And we know exercise improves the quality of sleep. So if you exercise regularly, you'll sleep better at night. And if you can do it in a little bit of sunshine, so you get some sun every day, that's great as well, because it can help to balance, control those circadian rhythms that are helpful for sleep. And we talked earlier about serotonin and the foods that contribute to the synthesis or creation, if you will, of serotonin. Serotonin converts to melatonin, which is helpful for sleep. And we know that, the stress response, we've evolved with that to fight or flee, to do something physical, not to worry about our finances. We go back many thousands of years ago. So we're meant to do something active. Exercise is the way to do that. It helps to get rid of that, what I like to call bound energy. And there are many studies that show exercise can ease depression and anxiety. How about sleep in your nervous system? Are you getting enough sleep? You're getting about 7.5 hours a night. Many people don't get that much. At the turn of the century, well, let's say 1900, people had about 9 hours a night. Many of us, by mid 1900s, were getting about 7.5 hours. Many people get less than that a day. So if you're getting 6.5 hours a night, the research shows that's not enough. It's for many reasons, and for the immune system and for our mood, right? But it's necessary for learning as well and creating memories, particularly non-REM stage 3, what we call that deep sleep, the delta sleep, and the REM sleep, the rapid eye movement sleep. Those help to consolidate memories, whether it be declarative, words, or how we ride a bike or play a flute. And when you sleep, there's a housekeeping role that comes into play here that removes toxins. Studies show that while we're sleeping, we eliminate the buildup of the beta amyloid and the tau that appears to be linked to Alzheimer's disease. There seems to be now a link that is becoming obvious in research studies between sleep and the disease of Alzheimer's. Sleep deprivation negatively affects our focus and our reaction time. What is it? The National Safety Foundation, I believe that's the title. If you, go online and you read about sleep, they'll tell you that people who are sleep deprived have these micro sleeps where they just kind of nod off. Part of the brain sort of nods off, if you will, for just a few seconds, just enough that they results in an automobile accident. When you're sleep deprived, you don't cope with your stressors as well the next day. It makes it more difficult. We all know we're more irritable when we don't get enough sleep, right? And it's tied to chronic disease, metabolic dysfunction, in other words, blood pressure and blood sugar, so hypertension, type 2 diabetes, etc. It's a factor in those chronic diseases. We talk about stress. That's the central organ of stress and how we adapt to it. We know that when you're chronically stressed, it can affect your cognition, your decision-making, anxiety, also depression and mood, right? We know there's a relationship here between chronic stress and not getting enough sleep. The sympathetic nervous system that causes the stress response is in overdrive. And so important to really learn how to cope with your stress in adaptive ways, whether it be meditation, Tai Chi, mindfulness meditation, any of the different forms of meditation, journaling, for example, working on your time management that creates stress, etc. And we know that certain neurons actually show a debranching and a shrinkage of those dendrites that receive the messages from other neurons. And so when people are chronically stressed, we can see physical changes actually in the brain. The brain is very plastic. We call it, plasticity. And what we do can influence, it's almost like the growth of the limbs of the tree or the withering of those limbs. Cortisol, which is a major stress hormone, also results in inflammation. And I told you that's something we want to avoid sort of overall. We know increased body weight, particularly belly fat, can contribute to increased inflammation in the body. Smoking, increased inflammation, chronic stress, chronic sleep deprivation, certain kinds of unhealthy diets. All of those play a role in inflammation. Well, cortisol does that, and that's a major stress hormone. And maladaptive coping behaviors contribute to nervous system disorders as well. Maladaptive coping behaviors, the consumption of alcohol or cigarettes, and some people use those as a way to sort of dampen their stress, don't they? They drink more, they smoke more, or they smoke. Some people have quit smoking. One of the major reasons when you talk to people as to why they've gone back to smoking, for some of them, it was the way I handled my stress, and I didn't find anything else. They hadn't learned other techniques of stress management. Chronic stress is considered to contribute a wide range of psychiatric and neurological conditions. It'll contribute to those. So whether it's those mood disorders, depression and anxiety, PTSD, for example, or neurological conditions as well. We mentioned alcohol and tobacco. We know alcohol affects the brain. And some studies are even showing not only heavy drinking, but more moderate drinking over time can actually affect the brain size and those communication pathways. And heavy drinking, we know, has an effect on those neurotransmitters, their activity. And many people, if they drink heavily, have low B1 levels, a B1 deficiency. Not only because of maybe the fact they're not getting enough in the diet, but changes in the GI tract, the gastrointestinal tract. So we know alcohol, particularly if you start drinking more to deal with stress, for example, is certainly not beneficial for our overall health. And that includes the brain. We know it may be bad for our hearts, for our livers, etc., but also for the brain. And we know tobacco increases the risk for neurological and neurovascular complications. And again, smoking contributes to inflammation, and that oxidative stress, which can damage cells, promotes the development of those diseases. And we know that if you smoke, it's not good for the cardiovascular system, and that remember, whatever's good for the heart and the cardiovascular system is good for the brain, and vice versa. What are some other ways to nourish the brain too? Believe it or not, how about socializing? Just think about COVID and how people were isolated and what it did for their mood. Well, we know, particularly as we get older, that when people don't socialize, when they lose loved ones and they're retired, etc., it doesn't bode well for their overall health. Well, that also stands true for the brain and the nervous system. Socializing has been shown to stimulate attention and memory. So if you want to keep your memory sharp, this is one thing. Make sure you socialize, and it helps to strengthen those neural networks. How about puzzles and games that rely on logic or math or word or visuospatial skills? If you like to do those kinds of things. If not, try learning a new skill. Maybe you want to learn how to play the flute. Or how about a language? In fact, even try a new route when you're driving or you're walking. All right, because this is going to call, in addition, other neurons into play Read a variety of books, not just the type you're interested in, but switch it up, try something else. And don't forget the preventative health care that's so important for the cardiovascular system, right? To prevent those metabolic diseases that ultimately can impact your brain. I've given you a number of resources here that you might want to take a look at that talk about the things that you can do to nourish that brain and the nervous system and keep it in tip-top shape. And some of it's from the NIH or the CDC. Some of it just from US News. And with that, I want to thank you. I'm going to give you a few minutes. Maybe you have a comment to make, or maybe you have a question, and we'll address those before we close. So let me just check out the chat. You talk about the problem of calcium depositing in the arteries. Okay, so question is, can you talk about the problem of calcium and depositing in the arteries? Okay, well, first of all, I think it's important to recognize that calcium, whether we get it from milk products or other products as well, we get some from nuts, for example, from some of the vegetables like broccoli, is important for other systems of the body. And we should be getting, as adults, about 1,000 milligrams a day. Doesn't have to come from milk, and there are many plant-based milks, if you will, that will provide that. I think that's, less of an issue. I know there's been some concern about women who are taking calcium supplements, if, for example, they have osteopenia or osteoporosis, and they're taking that and vitamin D. But when we get the buildup of fatty plaque, so really, in essence, let's say you get an injury in the lining of the artery, which happens all the time from the force of blood pressure, for example. You start to get a fatty streak and the laying down of a number of different kinds of fats, and it can get calcified. And that's part of that atherosclerotic issue. I think overall, it's more about that, the plaque and the calcium building up in the arteries is more about the hypertension, is more about the high cholesterol, is more about the high triglyceride levels. And if you're having a diet that's providing your 1,000 milligrams or so of calcium, it's not going to be a big issue. I hope that answers the question for you. Let's see if we have anything else. Will you be able to share this? I believe this PowerPoint I think the whole thing is being recorded, if that's helpful. And let me just go very quickly. Let's see, share the screen. And maybe go back to some of the resources at the end, and maybe you want to take a snapshot. I think you'll find a lot of good information in these resources. But just remember, it's really interesting as someone who teaches health, when we talk about diet, so many of the foods that we talk about, the types of foods that are beneficial for our heart health, also in many cases help our bone health, also help to prevent type 2 diabetes. So, and poor diets seem to be, and lifestyles, not exercising, for example, and smoking and having too much stress. Those things seem to be associated with not just one chronic disease, but a number of different chronic diseases. So do yourself a favor. I think overall, getting enough sleep, eating a sort of a plant-based healthy diet. Look at Harvard School of Public Health and their healthy eating plate and the information that they provide. And take a look at the dietary factors. Most researchers recommend whole foods, not a lot of supplements, because there may be an interplay between the different nutrients. And, a little bit of emphasis on diet and 30 minutes of exercise a day, at least, about 5 days a week. Try not to be too sedentary. And trying to focus on your stress and shut these electronic devices off a little bit sooner so you can get 7 hours a night. And overall, not only will you stay healthier, but new research is showing that it can help to prevent that biological aging. You can save yourself several years of biological aging. And with that, I want to thank you and hope we've given you something to think about. Have a wonderful day and stay healthy. Bye now.